This is not the first time Iranian authorities have shut down internet access across the country. Iran has previously imposed nationwide or near-total internet blackouts during moments of political unrest and conflict, including during the 2019 protests over fuel price increases, the 2022 protests under the slogan Woman, Life, Freedom, when restrictions were applied intermittently, and during the 12-day Iran-Israel conflict in June. Each of those events saw significant limits placed on digital communication, though the level and speed of shutdowns have evolved over time. According to Alp Toker, director at the internet monitoring service NetBlocks, Iran's authorities have implemented successive internet blackouts over several years as part of a process of refining and centralizing their censorship mechanisms. Toker says that what once involved taking down networks individually has now become an instant and centralized process, adding that the concept of an internet kill switch in Iran is no longer figurative but an operational reality. In earlier cases, including the protests in 2019 and the conflict in June, overall connectivity was reported to be higher than it is now. During those periods, some phone services remained operational, and limited access through virtual private networks or VPNs was available to parts of the population. However, by the time of the 2025 Israel-Iran war blackout and the events that followed, shutdowns had become faster and more comprehensive. Toker says that even standard phone calls were disabled, and that such outages are no longer exceptional events, but are now part of how connectivity is routinely managed in Iran. Data from those earlier blackouts showed that connectivity dropped to approximately 4 to 5% in 2019 and to around 3% in June 2025. In contrast, the current blackout has shown no significant fluctuations or temporary restorations of access, indicating a more sustained and consistent shutdown. As a result of this complete internet blackout, verifying information from inside Iran has become increasingly difficult in recent days. The government-imposed shutdown has severely restricted the ability of journalists and monitoring organizations to build a clear and comprehensive picture of events on the ground. The lack of connectivity has also made it difficult to establish when specific protest footage was recorded, as people inside Iran are unable to share videos and images as events unfold, or immediately afterward. In many cases, video material is only shared days later, when individuals manage to find alternative ways to connect to the internet. Monitoring service NetBlocks continues to track the ongoing lack of connectivity, highlighting the scale and consistency of the current shutdown. Amid these restrictions, Iran held pro-establishment rallies across the country yesterday. These events were attended by thousands of people, and BBC Persian has seen text messages that invited people to take part. State television channels continued this morning to praise what they described as a high turnout at the state-organized rallies. The Fars news agency, which is close to Iran's powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, claimed that around 3 million people participated in yesterday's march in Tehran in support of the establishment. However, this figure has been disputed by Factnameh, a foreign-based Iranian fact-checking platform. Factnameh says the crowd was closer to around 140,000 people and described the higher figure as implausibly exaggerated, stating with confidence that the actual number was several dozen times lower. Some online users also questioned photographs shared by state television and pro-government agencies that showed large crowds in Tehran's Engelab Square. Those users claimed the images were old and dated back to crowds at the funeral of top Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated by the United States in January 2020. However, reverse image searches indicate that the photos are recent, and they were matched with aerial footage of yesterday's rally, broadcast by state television. While protests inside Iran may now appear quieter, reports suggest that the scale of deaths and injuries is only gradually becoming clearer. A government official has said that at least 2,000 people have been killed, including members of the security forces, while also acknowledging that the true figure may be much higher. Iranian citizens are now able to make some phone calls abroad, but Iran's international isolation has deepened. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said today that the world is witnessing what he described as the final days and weeks of the Iranian regime. He stated that when a regime can only maintain power through violence, it is effectively at its end, and added that the population is rising up against it. At the same time, pro-government crowds have continued to demonstrate their loyalty to the Islamic Republic. Meanwhile, United States President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran. China, which is a major customer for Iranian oil, has said it will defend its interests. For now, Iranian authorities may have gained the upper hand in this confrontation. However, this marks the third major challenge to their rule in under 7 years, with each episode described as further weakening their hold on power. The European Union has said it will swiftly propose further sanctions on authorities responsible for the repression of anti-government protests in Iran. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, described the number of casualties as horrifying and condemned what she called the excessive use of force and continued restrictions on freedom. She said that, in coordination with her deputy Kaja Kallas, further sanctions on those responsible would be proposed quickly, adding that the European Union stands with the people of Iran who are marching for their liberty. Iran's foreign minister has responded to comments from German Chancellor Merz, saying that of all governments, Germany is perhaps the worst place to address human rights. He cited what he described as Germany's blatant double standards over recent years and said these had destroyed any remaining credibility. He added a sharply worded rebuke, telling German officials to show shame. As this situation continues to develop, thousands of people are feared dead following Iran's crackdown on anti-government protests. Demonstrations began more than 2 weeks ago, and while some international phone calls have now resumed, many Iranians are only now able to describe the scale of death and destruction to relatives abroad. The story is still unfolding, and the flow of information remains heavily restricted. This broadcast will now continue with a closer look at how the protests began, how the government response has unfolded, and what is currently known about the scale of casualties and international reactions, based strictly on available and verified reporting. As the situation in Iran continues to unfold, more details are emerging about the scale of the government response and the growing international reaction, though verification remains difficult due to the ongoing internet blackout. According to multiple reports received by the BBC, Iranian security forces have been cracking down on anti-government protests with deadly force. Thousands are now feared dead following what has been described as a violent clampdown on demonstrations that have spread across the country over the past 2 weeks. Earlier accounts from inside Iran describe scenes of extreme violence. One Iranian witness told the BBC that they saw security forces fire directly into a line of protesters, saying that people fell where they stood. Medical staff have also described hospitals as being overwhelmed with both the dead and the injured, with facilities struggling to cope with the volume of casualties arriving in a short period of time. Because of the days-long internet blackout, the BBC and other international organizations are relying on external reports and indirect sources to estimate the number of people killed. Among those reported dead are Amir Mohammed Kukan, a 26-year-old football coach, and Amiani, a 23-year-old Kurdish fashion student. Iranian state media has also broadcast funeral processions for members of the security services who were killed during the unrest. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has claimed that security forces brought anti-government protests under total control on Monday. State television reported that supporters of the authorities took to the streets in solidarity against what it described as recent terrorist actions. Despite these claims, there have been unconfirmed reports that some protests continued overnight, though the lack of internet access has made it difficult to verify when and where videos were recorded. The scale of the death toll remains disputed. BBC Persian correspondent G.R. Gol said he can state with confidence that the number of people killed must be in the thousands, describing the level of force used as unprecedented compared with previous crackdowns. Reuters news agency also cited an Iranian security official who estimated that around 2,000 people may have been killed. That source said the figure included both civilians and security personnel, and blamed what were described as terrorist elements for the deaths. The United Nations has also commented on the situation. Jeremy Lawrence, a spokesperson for the UN Human Rights Office, told a conference in Geneva that reports indicate hundreds have been killed and thousands arrested. He said these estimates were based on the UN's own sources on the ground, which he described as reliable. Separately, one human rights group said it believed nearly 650 protesters had been killed and thousands injured, while acknowledging that the true number could be higher. Several factors continue to make it difficult to determine the exact number of deaths. Iran restricts international news organizations from operating freely inside the country, and the internet blackout has now lasted several days, cutting millions of people off from online communication. This has significantly limited the flow of information and made independent verification extremely challenging. International reaction has continued to build. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz repeated his view that the world is witnessing what he described as the final days and weeks of the Iranian regime. Speaking as other European countries summoned Iranian ambassadors, Merz said that when a regime can only maintain power through violence, it is effectively at its end, and added that the population is rising up against it. Elsewhere in Europe, Spain's foreign minister has summoned Iran's ambassador to Madrid to express strong repudiation and condemnation of the protest crackdown, according to AFP news agency. Finland's foreign minister, Elina Valtonen, also said she would summon Iran's ambassador, writing on social media that Iran's regime had shut down the internet to kill and oppress in silence. She added that this would not be tolerated. The human impact of the blackout has also been felt among Iranians living abroad. Several BBC Persian listeners have described being unable to contact family members inside Iran. One woman said she had been unable to reach her family during what she described as brutal violence, adding that there had been a complete shutdown. She said the stress and lack of sleep had prevented her from returning to work after sick leave. Another BBC Persian audience member said his connection with Iran had been completely cut off since Thursday. He said he had no information about his family's situation and was extremely worried, adding that several of his friends were facing the same uncertainty. He said the situation had left him without the energy to work and had caused him to lose his appetite. As limited international phone calls have begun to go through for the first time in several days, Iranians have been telling relatives abroad about what they describe as terrible levels of death and destruction. One resident of Rasht, a city on the coast of the Caspian Sea, described the area as unrecognizable, saying that everything was burned with fire. The use of live ammunition by security forces has also been accompanied by a wave of arrests. The Hengao Organization for Human Rights has reported that a 26-year-old man detained last Thursday has already been sentenced to death. According to the organization, Irfan Soltani's family has been informed that he will be executed tomorrow. They have reportedly been given no information about when his trial took place or what charges were brought against him. Awar Sheki from the Hengao Organization for Human Rights told the BBC that the group had never witnessed a case move so quickly. He said the government was using every tactic it knew to suppress people and spread fear. One of the largest nationwide anti-government protests took place on Thursday, marking the 12th night of demonstrations. Protests in Iran began more than 2 weeks ago, on the 28th of December, when shopkeepers took to the streets of Tehran in response to another sharp fall in the value of the Iranian currency, the rial, against the US dollar on the open market. Over the past year, the rial has sunk to a record low, while inflation has surged. This has caused the prices of everyday items, such as cooking oil and meat, to rise to levels described as crippling. The economy has been weakened by what has been described as government mismanagement and corruption, as well as by sanctions linked to Iran's nuclear program. The protests quickly spread beyond Tehran to other cities and towns, alongside wider calls for political change. According to the US-based Iranian human rights activist news agency, demonstrations have taken place in at least 186 cities and towns across all of Iran's provinces. Since then, hundreds of protesters have been reported killed and thousands injured, according to human rights groups, though the digital blackout has made it difficult to verify information as it emerges. In recent days, US President Donald Trump has threatened intervention. On Monday, he warned that the United States was considering what he described as very strong options. Overnight, he announced a 25% tariff on goods from countries with commercial ties to Iran. His national security team is expected to meet to discuss intervention options, and officials told the BBC's U.S. partner, CBS News, that Trump has been briefed on a range of military and covert tools that could be used. As this phase of the crisis continues, access to reliable information remains limited, and many details are still emerging. In the next part of this report, we will examine further accounts from medical professionals, statements from Iranian and international officials, and additional details about the ongoing crackdown and its wider implications, strictly based on available reporting.